Hi, today we're going to be talking about empathy and how it's going to give you superhuman abilities, because I know you all want that. I also heard you all laugh at the red shirts joke, so I know you're all Star Trek geeks. You can't hide here. But you're home, we're family, it's okay. I'm Matt, I'm your new friend, or your old friend, depending, but either way, we're friends now, whether or not you want it. You're stuck with me. I'm partner and technical director at Titan Co., podcast at the 5 Minute Geek Show, Laravel podcast. I blog at mattstauffer.co. I'm at StaufferMatt on Twitter and lots of other stuff. I'm around. Again, we're friends, so if you're not connected to me there, you should be. So, may surprise you to hear this, but I'm actually a jerk. You may have heard that I'm nice. I kind of garnered a little bit of reputation as like a nice guy. One of my favorite interviews that's ever happened with me was Eric Barnes, who runs Laravel News, and he said, "You are happier than a woodpecker in a lumber yard," which is how you know he's an American Southerner, because I've never heard that phrase, but I love it, and I hear it in his accent, and it's perfect. But in reality, I'm actually a self-centered, prideful jerkbag, and I'm not using some hyperbole here. These things are actually true. So when I was in first of all, you may think that I'm the only one, but it's actually all of us that struggle with this, whether or not you know it. And you've probably heard the whole kind of concept of the hardest problem in computer science is naming or cache invalidation, garbage collection, whatever. It's actually, turns out, not being an opinionated jerk about everything. And if you don't connect with that, you're probably the opinionated jerk. But if you don't connect with that, you've run into these people before, you've been this person before. This is a part of all of us. And empathy is going to be the thing that helps us move past this space. So, quick story time, just so you know that I'm not just using hyperbole. I am indeed a big jerk. When I was in high school, I was out to dinner with a whole bunch of friends, and one of those bunches was a family of 8. And if you think about that, that means there's 2 parents, probably in this particular situation there was, and 6 children. So they said, going out to eat is very expensive for us. When you imagine just getting soda alone for 8 people, that's probably $3 American per soda. That's $25 just for the soda. So one of the things when we go out as a family is we don't get soda a lot of the time, and it's a special treat when we do. So they're telling us this story as we're getting ready for dinner, and I say, okay, that's cool. So I'm the first one to order, so what do I order? Well, I order whatever my food was, chicken, whatever, and a Sprite. And my girlfriend at the time kind of looks at me with this look, and she's kind of like, and I'm like, why is she giving me this face? I don't know what's going on. And then everyone else orders, and they all order waters, but it's not standing out to me that they all order waters. We have our whole meal. Time comes to pay. I bring out my credit card. I'm ready to pay. And then the father says, no, I got it. And in that moment, something shifted me, and I said, no, you don't pay for me, because first of all, you always do that, right? But second of all, I said, you don't pay for me because I got a Sprite, and you're not supposed to be And I realized that I was the jerk sitting here with 12 other people all drinking water, and I'm sipping my sugar-laden Sprite when I had completely missed the message, right? There's some other times this kind of stuff happens. If you've ever seen a new feature come out for Laravel or whatever else, and you see the response to everybody is, Laravel has lost its way. Why would you ever imagine releasing such a terrible feature? Single responsibility principle or whatever else. Why would you ever do that? You're totally missing the point, right? Or in the US, when there's another police killing, and there's another round of protests, and all these folks are saying, oh, why are those people rioting? Don't they understand? They're just causing more destruction, okay? In each of these contexts, there's a conflict of some sort, and there's one thing missing that could resolve that conflict, and that is empathy. So, if you learn one thing from this conference, this year, in your professional growth, whatever else it ended up being, I want it to be empathy. And I'm going to make a promise to you that it is going to be more influential in your life, in your career, in your growth, and everything than anything else. And I know, I'm basically saying my talk is more important. That's not true. But this will have a greater, broader influence on your whole life than anything else you're going to hear about over the next year, anything you're excited about. So more than microservices, domain-driven design, functional programming, Laracon, Laravel, even beer. Empathy will have a more positive, especially, impact than any of these things. As developers, we have a tendency to think that our skill is the most important thing. You often hear this developer, a framework developer, a library developer, whatever it ends up being, who's in a situation where they say, well, mine is absolutely the best. Why doesn't anybody understand that? Why is this other one popular? Mine's better. I handle this particular concern better, or I understand these weird edge cases better, and theirs is simpler or less powerful, and yet theirs is more popular. Why is this? And they don't get it. They say, my skill is better, mine is technically more capable, and yet somehow somebody else is successful. And of course, there's lots of reasons that contribute to that, but one of them is often just the fact that skill's not everything. There's a lot more going on, and we're going to talk about some of those. So Paul Graham's one of the founders of Y Combinator, and he said, empathy is probably the single most important difference between a good hacker or programmer and a great one. Some hackers are quite smart, but when it comes to empathy, are practically solipsists. And if you're like me, you have no idea what that word means, so you look it up, which I did for you. Solipsism is an extreme preoccupation with an indulgence of one's feelings, desires, etc. So solipsism is basically egoistic self-absorption. So if you're seeing that solipsism and empathy are being placed at odds with each other, you can start getting a sense about what we're talking about with empathy. He says it's hard for such people to design great software because they can't see things from the user's point of view. C.A.R. Hoare, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, sorry if I massacred it, said the most important property of a program is whether it accomplishes the intention of its user. Not whether it's the best architecture or whatever, whether it accomplishes the intentions of its user. And Kent Beck, oh snap, Kent Beck, the craft of programming begins with empathy, not formatting or languages or tools or algorithms or data structures, but empathy. So I'm going to make a promise to you. You will write better programs. You will write better code. You will do your actual job as a programmer better when you have more empathy. And I'm going to actually take it a step further than there. Empathy is going to make you smarter, faster, more well-loved, more employable, and a better lover. We won't be going into that during this talk, but it's true. Trust me. No. And many people will benefit. Many people will benefit. Your users, well, actually, let's just go through each of these one by one. Your users will benefit because you're going to have a better ability to put yourself in their shoes and understand what they want out of the programs you're writing for them. Your clients will benefit because you're going to have a better ability to step into their set of unique needs and priorities, and you'll do a better job of representing them rather than being at odds with each other. Your employers will benefit because just like with the clients, you're going to do a better job of understanding their priorities than representing them. Best employees are the ones who understand what the employers care about and make it happen. You'll be better for your employees because as an employer, you're going to understand better what your employees value out of what they're getting from working for you, what they need, and how you can provide it best for them. Your colleagues, you're going to know how best to operate with them. All these things are sharing. And your spouse, significant other, you're going to know what they need when you're not being able to provide what they want for them. When you're having a conflict, you'll be able to better understand what it is that they're actually wanting from you that you're not providing, and on and on and on. And finally, even the waiter at your favorite restaurant. This may not be true as much in Europe, but one of the things that drives me the most nuts is when someone acts like somebody who's in some sort of serving capacity, whether it's a waiter or someone at a clothing store or whatever, acts like they're not a human, like they're a robot, kind of dismiss them, or they give their order without looking at them. Every person you interact with will be in a better situation when you have more empathy. So, if we're doing all this talk about why empathy is so great and why it's going to make such a big change in your life, we should talk about defining it. So, this is the dictionary definition of empathy. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And I think this is good. This is a start. It's not enough, but it's a start. So let's talk about breaking that out into little pieces. So there's a nursing scholar named Teresa Wiseman, and she went in and she studied a whole bunch of different professions that have empathy as a part of them in some way. And she tried to define 4 key attributes of empathy, especially in a professional context. And so she identified these 4 attributes as, first, to be able to see the world as others see it. So being able to take somebody else's perspective. Second, to be non-judgmental. So it's not just to be able to see their perspective, but to not immediately assign it to be bad. Third, to understand another person's feelings. Perspective is more mental, feeling is more emotional. So it's also be able to understand that. And fourth, to be able to communicate your understanding of that person's feelings back to them. Now that fourth one is a little bit more tied to professional context. Often when you talk about personal empathy, you don't have to communicate it back in order for it to be empathy. But in professional context, empathy being useful requires you actually letting them know that you understand this. So, at Laracon US, Samantha Quinones gave a talk that I missed. I missed one talk at the whole conference because of work emergency, and it was the one that was most relevant to this talk. But I found her slides afterwards, and I love this slide. Empathy is the choice to be vulnerable for each other. So if we're talking about understanding someone else's emotions and being able to not judge it, especially with that last slide we looked at, it seems like you could do this a little bit more clinically. You're more removed, you're more distant, you're more separate from them. But in order to understand someone's emotions, to not judge it, to really get it, you have to open yourself up to them. And you might say, oh, this is all touchy-feely. Walk with me, we'll walk through this. But I just want to say, a level of personal comfort and vulnerability, well, I guess eventually discomfort, but understanding your emotional state and being able to be vulnerable with somebody else is a necessary foundation to empathy. So, that leads us into a conversation that's really helpful, which is the fact that empathy and sympathy are not the same thing. And often we think of them both as being kind of emotionally sensitive to another person when they're in a bad situation, right? I get you, I feel you, okay, that's really tough, let's move on. So Brené Brown is a teacher and a speaker, and she has all sorts of videos on YouTube that I really suggest you check out. But she has one really short animated video from the RSA that talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy, and I love it. I wish we could just watch the whole thing right now, but instead, I stole some slides, put her name at the bottom, hoping I don't get sued, and we're gonna check them out right here. So imagine this little fox is your friend or your family member, and they're in a really difficult time. They may be depressed, they might be going through something difficult with their family, whatever it is. And when you're in that depression, if you've never been there yourself, it feels like you're at the bottom of a physical, deep, dark pit. There's no light, there's no way out, you're stuck and you're overwhelmed, okay? So when you interact with this person, there's two primary ways we can interact with them. And the first one is sympathy. Sit there up at the top of the pit, you look down and say, yeah, that must be pretty bad. It's pretty tough. I'm really sorry to see you're there. You know, you see the chewing the sandwich. I don't know why, but I just really appreciate this character being the pink polo and everything. I don't know what it is about the pink polo. Sorry if you're wearing a pink polo, but and watch the video. The voice is perfect. So that's sympathy, and sympathy often begins with something like "at least." So you say something like, "I'm getting a divorce." Well, at least you know you can get married. I had a miscarriage. Well, at least you can have another one. My one kid is failing out of school. Well, at least the other kid's doing well in school. Distant, sympathetic responses don't involve connection and engagement. Now, on the other hand, an empathic response requires, remember, vulnerability and engagement and stepping into their space. So the empathic response means you, the friendly little bear who you just want to hug, climb down into the bottom of the pit with them. And you say, hey, I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Now, you may not be able to see it, but I have goosebumps, because that is so significant. That's such a huge difference from the sympathy aspect. And so you can't just step down there, because remember, you need to be vulnerable and you need to understand their emotional state. You actually, in some way, have to find a part within you that identifies with that place where they are and takes it into you. That's why it requires vulnerability, because in order to really understand someone's feelings, it can't be like, yes, I understand that the concept of depression, blah, blah. No, that doesn't work, all right? If you don't feel in some way, some small way, you don't have to become fully depressed. If you're not able to feel in some way in a way that you can really understand, empathize with where they are, you're not going to be able to help them. But further, helping them may not mean fixing everything. Often, talk about spouse again. A lot, you'll hear me reference spouse a lot because I've learned my own shortcomings the most in marriage. Often as a spouse, and statistically, this is more common for the male spouse, when you hear something is wrong, your first response is to say, how can I fix it? And you're like asking questions to lead you to how you can possibly fix the problem that's going on. And what you'll inevitably hear is, I don't want you to fix it, I just want you to hear, or I just want you to understand. And that is a really important aspect of empathy. It's not always about fixing, it's really just about connecting. You don't need to have everything fixed. It may not be fixable. And what you really end up needing to say is, wow, thank you for telling me that. That must be really hard. I don't know what to do, but I'm just so glad you said something. And then you hug and a little heart icon pops up above your head, right? So, there's two primary types of empathy. There's actually quite a few more. There's mirror empathy and all these other ones, but there's two primary types when we're having this sort of a conversation. And the two are cognitive and affective, or emotional empathy. So emotional empathy lines up with a lot of stuff we've been talking about here. It's usually a shared emotional response. And cognitive empathy, on the other hand, is more about mental, taking the same perspective as the other person. So Often when someone says, you need to be more emotionally empathic, the response is, oh, that's just fluffy, feel-good stuff. Or, that's cool, but I don't know how, and I don't know how to control my emotions in such a way where I can be emotionally empathic. And that's true to a degree, but you can't control it. But let's just put that on pause for a second. Cognitive empathy has nothing to do with your inherent ability, and we'll talk about this in a bit. Cognitive empathy can be taught, and it can be learned. And so we're going to focus a little more on that today because there's skills and tactics you can put into effect to be cognitively empathic. And remember, emotionally empathic or effectively empathic means taking their feelings on. Cognitively empathic means taking their perspective on. They're both important. They're both very closely tied. But it's a lot easier for us, especially as technical people, to look at cognitive empathy. So we'll start there. So one important aspect to empathy, and this will make sense reading the slide when you hear what we just talked about, is learning to listen well. If you don't have the capability to really dig down and understand the person you're talking to, then you're not going to be able to understand the person you're talking to. And if that's what we're talking about, is understanding and sharing emotional state, then we need to be able to listen well in order to do that. So my wife volunteers with a group called Created. And Created is a group that intends to hear and understand and love women who are working in sex industries, various sex industries. And so it may be stripping or prostitution or being sex trafficked, whatever it ends up being. The vast majority of people have one of two very different responses to hearing that someone's in the sex industry. They either hear first that, oh, that's a horrible person, they've made bad decisions, they got themselves there, they have no moral, upright, whatever. Or second, that's a free person, and look how free they are to use their sexuality to their benefit, and prostitution is the oldest, career, or whatever. Both of those are missing a key aspect of the situation, which is understanding the actual experiences of the women who are in these situations, and it is almost entirely women. So what these women with Created do is they go out into the streets or into the strip clubs or whatever else, and they just get to know people. They are very disarming. They're not saying, you should this. They're not picketing with signs. They don't even have necessarily some defined set of steps, although they do help them get out if they want to. But the primary thing they're doing is they're saying, we want to get to know you. We think you're valuable. And the vast majority of your life is people who are interacting with you in ways where they get a lot from you, but they don't pay any attention or love to you at all. And so they go and they interact with those women, and they just hear their stories. And I've heard the stories now. And I'm not saying that I looked at women's situations with some horrible disregard, but hearing the life situations that leads you to get to a place where the best decision you can make is to put yourself in that situation, hearing about the lack of control that women have when they're in that situation where that's the only way they can provide for their kids, hearing the desperation in their voices when they don't know how to get out, really has a big impact in how you see them. There's a rape crisis center volunteer who said, once you hear these stories, you can't help become an advocate. And that's what's important here, is when you hear the situations of people, you're not just hearing them. You're not just connecting with them emotionally. You're taking on their perspective, and you're starting to take on their priorities. Empathy is at its core reorienting yourself to be in line with the other person. That's why you have to become an advocate, because when you actually have real empathy with someone, you share their values a little bit and you share their feelings. It's not like you disappear, but you're taking that onto yourself and you understand why they value the things that they do. And you may say, that sounds nice, Matt, but I don't even know how to empathy. And if you're not a native English speaker, yes, that is wrong. I'm being silly. Sorry, I realized. Anyway, so let's talk about what it looks like to actually learn empathy. So Helen Reese is an associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard. She studies these things. She studies neuroscience and all this kind of stuff. And she said, empathy is not inherent. It is a skill and can be learned. Speaking of massacring things, this guy's last name I'm going to massacre, Roman Krznaric. I looked it up online for like 45 minutes and couldn't find it, but that's what I'm going to say. He says 98% of us have the ability to be empathic wired into our brains, and the remaining 2% are people with some extreme social disorders. So whether or not you feel like you have empathy, you have the capability to be empathic. So how do we become more empathic? Well, a really important piece of this is cultivating curiosity about others. Being in a place where you actually are curious and interested to learn from the stories and experiences and values and priorities of the people around you is a key element of empathy. So Roman, the guy with the hard last name, has been involved in this concept called human library. And if you picture it like this graphic, which I love, you picture going up to shelves of the library, and instead of pulling off a person, or a book, you may pull off a person. And you sit and you just receive from them in the same way you receive from a book, and you hear their story. And there's some important aspects of this, one of them being you don't talk back to a book. But there's something in that book that makes it worth your time to sit and receive from it. And the concept here, and they actually put on human library events, right? There's an event where there's a whole bunch of people, and usually they're like, well, here's, the old war vet, and here's the Muslim, and here's the immigrant, or whatever it ends up being in that particular, circumstance. Here's the people who are so different from you in so many different ways. Why don't you go just read a book, listen to a story, hear a person? Remember, you don't talk back to a book, right? So one of the important steps to this is learning to shut off your inner voice. Now, if you're here, you're a programmer or a project manager or someone who's in this technical space, and we as people tend to have a lot of opinions, and we like to share them. I'm on a stage. Of course I love to share my opinion. But in the context of empathy, we need the ability to stop and turn off our voices and just listen to what's going on with the person in front of us. So, my grandpa Mikas is one of the most significant influences in my entire life. I wish I had a picture of him, but he's six, probably, sorry, those are feet. He's about as tall as me. He's broader, and by the end of his life, he was shuffling around like this. He was a sweet, gentle guy. He always called my grandma his bride. He said, my bride to her, and he said, well, my bride this and my bride that. And they'd been married for, I don't even know how long, 60 years or something like that. And he still did that. And with your grandpa, I think when you're younger, your grandpa gives you candy, maybe, is nice to you, whatever. And when you get older, they might be annoying, but hopefully you at least love your grandparents a little bit. But I reached the point in college where it was now, wow, there's a wealth of experience that this man has. He was involved in a war, he's lived through depression, all these different things. And so when I went to visit him, I would try to sit down with him and just listen. And the amount of things I learned about my family, about my country, about my culture, from just sitting and listening to him was incredible. But the thing is, even in those moments, it was this kind of dialogue. And I'm not saying dialogue is bad, but I had an assignment for school where you have to sit down and only ask questions, like totally interview, ask a question and just sit and listen with the video camera of somebody in your family for a while as a part of some school assignment. And in that moment, I learned things about him that he had never told me of years of us sitting around having these chats. Because there was something, and he was a little uncomfortable at times. He's like, you're recording me, you're not going to talk back to me. I said, Grandpa, that's the assignment. But there was something about just sitting and listening to his stories and just being silent and just hearing where he went. Because there would be a time where maybe I would have naturally interjected or something, and instead I just waited. And the places he went, it was really beautiful, and the things that I learned about him, and I really cherished those times. So, another tool, and this is coming a little bit more from marriage and relational stuff, you've probably heard this one if you've ever been in premarital counseling, is to repeat what the other person said before you respond to them. You resolve conflicts on average statistically 80% faster. So what that means is you're spending the entire conversation listening not for when you have the clever thing to say or interject, but instead listening so that you can understand what they're actually saying so you can repeat it back to them. So first of all, you're spending the whole time focusing on them and what they're saying. And second of all, when they're done, you say it back to them, and they either say, yes, you understood me, or no, that's not what I meant at all. These are big steps to how empathy and the process of developing empathy can be a part of our general everyday lives. So Sean McCool, guy who was up here beforehand, runs a podcast called Dev Discussions. And he had my business partner Dan and I on the podcast to ask us, as business owners, what's it like working with developers? And he asked a lot of really good questions that I appreciate. You should listen to it, not because we're great, because he asked great questions. And I found that my answer to almost every single question was empathy. So he'd ask something like, when there's Twitter wars between all the developers, what do you wish they would know? I was like, empathy. He says, when you're hiring somebody, what are you really looking for from them? I said, empathy. Over and over and over, I found myself realizing that the thing I want more from developers as a hiring person, but also just as a person in the community, is empathy. So let's go a little further into that. I actually, after that interview, first of all, decided to give this talk. But second of all, I came up with a little rule that I've never told anybody before, and I actually bought a prop just for this rule. I got it on Amazon, shipped to me the day before I came. And you guys don't know how excited I am about this right now. This right here. So this right here is Matt's why the rule. Every time you find yourself saying, why the yes, would this person do this? This is an opportunity for empathy. Because when you ask that question, you think, if you read just those words without the context of that language, you think someone's actually curious. Why would somebody do that? But you know from the fact that it says, why the, dang it, would this person do this? This is so much fun. What you really mean is, why the is this person so stupid? Why the did this person do something I wouldn't have, right? That's what you really mean when you ask that question. So when you find yourself asking that question, the question which is why the would that person do this, stop and calm down and realize that you're focusing primarily on your own thoughts and your own priorities in that moment. And what you're really saying is, why the is that person different than me? Why the does that person have different priorities than me? Why the dang it. Would that person do something different than what I choose to do in this particular moment? That's what you're asking. So stop asking those questions. And instead ask, why the indeed would this person do that? You can still have your clown horn if you want. But what you're saying there is, why do they do that? What does actually motivate that person to make those decisions? So it's actually a good question if you actually are asking that question. It's a great question. What would motivate this person who I disagree with this in this moment to do that thing, to release that code, to put out that tweet, to say that thing, to not say that thing? What actually might motivate them to do that? And that's a great question. It leads to good thinking and good conversations. So, in Six Sigma, which is a thing developed by Toyota to help their manufacturing processes, one of the things they came up with when they're trying to address a particular problem is called the 5 whys. And the 5 whys are basically an idea that when you come up with a problem, you write it down, and the first thing you do is you ask the question, why? So if the problem, well, actually, we'll go through an example in a minute. And then you have that answer to why, right? Why there's a problem, you ask why is this problem, you have the answer, you write it down. And then you ask why again. And you keep asking why until the last problem actually concretely answers, it gives you a concrete answer to the actual original question. They call it the 5 whys because, first of all, it's much catchier than ask why until you have the answer, but also try to push you because we tend to settle for the first answer that we get. So it's try to encourage you to say, ask why over and over and over and over again until you actually get there. Shoot for 5 at least. And so what we're trying to do is winnow down and not just accept somebody's initial answer or our initial explanation, but to really understand what is the motivation behind this. So every time we make a software as a service at Titan, and also when I do them on the side, we end up going through this conversation. Adam Wathen is going to enjoy this one a lot because he's usually the one asking why to me. So the user wants an Excel-like grid of every single piece of data in the entire application where they can sort and filter and group and this and that and the other. So you got to ask the question why. Well, the user wants to be able to filter out just the users with the new status versus the users with the old status versus this. They want to be able to group them, right? Well, why do they want to be able to group them by status? Well, really, they only want to get a group just of the ones with the new status. Okay, why? Well, the users at some point need to email the list of every single new member to the leadership team. Why? Well, because the leadership team splits up responsibility for follow-up with all the new members. Okay, that's what we're talking about. So the function is not, I need an Excel-like grid in this particular moment. The function is, I need to be able to split up all the new members and make sure that they're each assigned to be followed up by with one of our leadership team. That's a very different feature requirement. And we had to ask why over and over and over and over and over again until we actually got to the point where we understood what was going on. So let's practice together some actual particular experiences, that are things that happen in our day-to-day life so we can see. The senior developer, this is also real-life experience, just here. The senior developer or the technical director of your company, who may or may not be named Matt, tells you, you need to use PHP Storm. Why? Thank you, whoever that was. They say you need to use PHP Storm. And we'll actually not practice the 5 whys here, but that was awesome. We're actually just going to practice a little bit of empathic thinking. Your immediate response to this might be, how dare you tell me what to do? I'm a developer. I can do what I can do, right? You don't need, you hired me because I know how to do my job. Don't tell me how to do my job, right? So when you sit there in that situation, when someone is doing this kind of oppressive act, what you say is, what motivations might actually lead this particular person to tell me that I must use PHP Storm? Well, I know it's really expensive, right? So if this person above me is deciding to spend $200 for every single person in the company, there must be some value. Well, I know we've been talking a lot about making sure that we don't miss this particular thing and that we run that other thing. And I know that when he started using PHP Storm, he found this particular benefit. And he might want to make sure we all have it. There also might be a benefit of consistency when the whole team's using the same thing so that the juniors can watch me using this and then learn, blah, blah. Okay, I may disagree, but I understand that. So it goes from, why are you oppressing me, to, I disagree, but I understand, right? But let's flip that around. When the employee says, no, you're oppressing me, as a leader, as a technical director, as a senior developer who may or may not be named Matt, your appropriate response is not to say, how dare you question me, I am the technical director. The appropriate response is to say, I wonder why it is that this person, or whatever, does not want to use PHP Storm. Well, they're already comfortable where they are. PHP Storm is a little bit slower. Sorry, PHP Storm. That's true. They may be in a context where PHP Storm is less useful because it's less flexible across the development environments that they're in. They may want the freedom to be able to make a decision about what particular tools they're using, and just the concept of deciding you're going to use a tool is already a conflict. And so just this conversation already, we've found that there's the immediate response, which starts conflict and drama, sets you up to be upset with people, and just stepping back from your initial emotional response and saying, well, why? What are the motivations behind that? Why the, would they actually be doing this? Sorry, I didn't have it in my hand. It's getting us to a place where we now have understanding. And that doesn't mean we're all going to agree. Remember, at the end of these, we still might not agree, but we're actually having some understanding. Or a framework developer, I'm not even going to suggest a name at this point, James, maybe. We'll do James, or Bob. Bob, I like Bob. A framework developer named Bob releases some new feature, right? This new piece of code, and you look at it and you say, why on earth would that framework developer put that thing out? It's dangerous. It violates the single responsibility principle. It's not as good as the one that I released 2 weeks ago. How would they ever imagine doing this? Remember we talked about this earlier, right? So in that moment, you stop. Now, the answer may be this person is a total dolt and you know way more than them. That might be your initial response. It also might be that there might be a different context. There might be a different set of priorities. There may be a different set of conversations or experiences or needs. You may be the Elasticsearch pro. This person may work with a lot of people who don't understand Elasticsearch, and they might know that the Elasticsearch newbies need this help. And this is not just Taylor, this is not just Laravel, this is everything. It's in the other direction too. Why would they make something so complex and diverse? Why don't they make something simple? Well, maybe that's what their users need, right? Each of these times, I'm assuming that everyone has the same perspective, priorities, and desires we do, and they just don't. Or maybe someone on Twitter has some opinion. Active record is dangerous and bad. Well, how could you ever say that, right? Why would you ever think that? Active record is great, it's fine, it works on all my apps, right? Well, maybe that person works in some crazy enterprise context, and they've found that in their particular context, active record and tying your database records directly to your models actually causes damage because they have such massive things with a ridiculous number of lines of code and distributed teams, yada, right? When you were saying active record is great, it works on my code, you probably weren't thinking about their environment and what they're prioritizing when they're making their decisions. That doesn't mean they couldn't have said active record is bad for my use, but you could also say, well, it's good for my use, right? And that's the thing that's missing, is that we all say our statements as if our world is the only world, right? Or you come across legacy code, and there's maybe 300, 400-line methods, and you just say, man, this former developer was terrible. You badmouth them in the team, their name becomes a little bit of a joke or whatever, right? But what you don't know is what constraints were there that caused them to write the particular code they were writing. What timeline was there? How much support were they given from their leadership? How much time were they given to implement that feature? How much training did they have? What was the state of their particular coding community at the time they wrote it, right? We always look at things as if everybody's in the exact same situation we're in right now and then judge them based on that. Or not even where we are now, maybe where we think of ourselves as being, right? You're not even judging their code against your code, you're judging them against the code you want to write, which your code doesn't even match up to. So, or your spouse. You come home and you're saying, sweetie, honey, boo-boo, whatever you call your spouse, snookums. No? Okay. It's going to be snookums just for all you. Snookums, I love you so much. I'm so happy to see you. And Snookum says, I don't want to talk to you right now, or they snap at you because you didn't clean the toilet, or whatever else it ends up being. And you kind of like go off in a huff, right? I was trying to be sweet. I called you Snookums. I was gentle to you, and you just were mean back to me, and you're insensitive, right? And again, this would never happen to me, but I'm just saying hypothetically, if the rest of you were to do something like this, maybe Snookums had a really rough day, heard some bad news, didn't get enough sleep, is feeling ill. Maybe you are not the center of the universe. And I'll just be honest, that's the first thing I had to learn when I got married, was that my wife can be mad and I might not be the source, and she still gets to be mad when she interacts with me because she's just mad. She's having a bad day or whatever, or something terrible happened. But for me, I was like, she's mad. She must be mad at me. I must have done something wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. Why is she mad at me? I'm a good husband, right? So each of these times, it's stepping outside of our own perspective and our own priorities and our own little world and trying to go into the brain and into the space and into the emotions and into the experiences of other people so we can understand it better. So you might have heard this, and you might be saying, You might be saying, what about the golden rule? You already know what I think about the golden rule because I went to one slide too fast. Why can we not just say, do unto others as you'd have done unto you, right? Do for other people what you want, and then you're good. That sounds really nice, and it's great, right? It's a really fantastic foundation. But the golden rule is not enough. It's a good start. You should start with at least treating people as well as you want to be treated. That's good. However, not everybody is the same as you. They don't all have the same priorities. They don't have all the same values. They don't have the same culture, language, experience, interest. I love tacos. And if everybody else loved tacos, me giving you a taco might be one of the greatest gifts I can ever give to you. My wife is allergic to onions. If I give her the vast majority of tacos on the planet, she'll have to go to the hospital or something, right? So it's not a very great gift if I give her a taco, unless it's an onionless taco. So you can't just presume that because you love tacos or bitterballen or whatever else it ends up being, you can just give them to other people. See, that was the Holland reference? I did that. So Piaget has a lot of theories, but we'll talk about two of them right now. And the two we're going to talk about right now are assimilation and accommodation. So the theory of assimilation is talking about how, as kids, we see something that's furry, and we are told by our parent that that furry thing is a dog. So then we say, oh great, furry things are dogs. You see a new furry thing, and you're like, that's a dog. This is assimilation, how it works. But it's not. It's a raccoon. Surprise. And then you have to go through accommodation, and you have to start understanding the processes of differentiating things. Not all furry things are dogs. I know that's a little distracting, so I'll go back to the previous one just so you can. So the thing is, we grow some, right? But we don't grow entirely out of that. We do have the ability to learn that not all furry things are dogs. But those processes of grouping, of seeing things that are different from us but alike in certain ways, and we put them together in a group and we think of them as the same. So a lot of stereotypes come out of this. A lot of racism, sexism, classism, a lot of these things come out of this. This at its core is not bad because it's a built-in part of how our brains work, but that doesn't give us a pass. Racism's still bad. Grouping doesn't make you a racist, but grouping doesn't give you a pass from being racist, or whatever else it ends up being. And we do this in big ways, and it's very clear. Racism, sexism, classism, whatever, all the isms. But we also do it in much smaller ways. You presume that people are going to be a certain way based on your experience with other people like them, or whatever else it ends up being. So, there was a lady named Patricia Moore, and she worked at a manufacturing company, and I think one of the things they made was refrigerators. And I think she was trying to suggest that they make refrigerators that are shaped a certain way because it was really difficult for certain people to open them, and she couldn't get the buy-in. So she got a makeup artist to give her prosthetics and makeup and all this kind of stuff and make her look like an 80-year-old woman, and she lived as an 80-year-old woman in a lot of contexts, not every day, but a lot of contexts for years. And she'd go out, and she'd go on the train, and she'd use all of her implements in her house as an 80-year-old woman. And she was one of the founders of original user experience design and empathy research because there's all this stuff where people just didn't understand that 80-year-old women or other people who are similarly disabled wouldn't be able to use this tool or that tool or the other. And her research is actually a foundation of the fact that many kitchen implements have big rubber grips, or there's certain big handles and other household implements because she was able to realize that people couldn't use them. Similarly, John Howard Griffin was a journalist, and he wanted to tell the story about being black in the American South. I think it was in the 60s, and he tried through interviews and it didn't work. So he actually worked with a doctor to get injections and to basically change himself so that every day he woke up and he put on the certain paints and certain things, but he also got injections to change his skin color and everything. And he traveled around the American South and wrote a book about the experience called Black Like Me, where he actually experienced what it was like, as best as possible, in a very short period of time, to live as a black man in the American South. So this is the extreme, right? You don't have to, get injections or, hobble yourself. But these are the extremes of people when they're going through the process of understanding how a different group experiences life. So when we talk about the difference between groups, often it's really easy, especially in terms of cultures, to talk about these high-level things. And I know it's a little hard to read, so I'll read some for you. Food, flags, festivals, performances, dance, games, literature, art, or whatever. So my wife is African-American, so when we got married, we knew that those things were going to be distinct, right? Oh yeah, this is going to be great. I like your food, you like my food, I like your music, you like my music. Wow, we're so cross-cultural, this is great, right? And we knew a few of these other things, but look at these other things that are hidden as cultural differences, and this is primarily between ethnic cultures, but also familiar cultures. Courtesy, manners, cleanliness, what is beautiful, what is your attitude towards elders and adolescents, how you approach marriage and decision-making, concepts of self and time. These are deeply embedded things that we don't understand are different, right? And all these things can be different, not just based on the individual, but based on these groupings. And so there's a big process of understanding this stuff, and you may be feeling overwhelmed. You might be saying, well, you mean I need to know this about every culture? No, you might need to know that these things are different. So when somebody does something, you say, clearly the fact that they were late means they're disrespectful. Well, if they're from Mexico, for example, in Mexico, your number one priority is the group of people where you're with in the moment. And everybody knows that if someone's late to your meeting, it's because they're honoring and respecting the person they're with right now. So you can be 20 minutes late, and everyone knows it's because you're respecting the person you were with before. So, snake sex. Yes. Remember, so my wife is African American. I am clearly not, if you hadn't noticed. And I was hanging out with her family, and her father is a Vietnam War vet, a very strict and together man who's very careful and considered, and I'm not that so much. And her older brothers were there, and the older brother of your significant other are kind of terrifying at times, and we're sitting there. But we've gotten comfortable. We've had a long day together. We're sitting in her father's living room just watching Discovery Channel. And some snakes come across the stage, and I remember that I'd read on Reddit or something this story about how snakes have sex. And there's one curious little thing that I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to share this story about this little thing about how snakes have sex. So I'm sitting at the TV. They're over there, right? And I start telling them, I'm like, do you know when snakes have sex, blah, blah, blah. And about halfway through my story, I look over, and her mouth is like, and her brothers are like, give me this look, and her father just had this quizzical look on his face, which is like, why would you be so stupid? And this man who I honor and respect, and he's incredible, he's so like strict and rigid, like he doesn't like you to say the word lying because it's too close to the concept of lying, right? Like so the fact that I'm talking about how snakes have sex in his living room was this thing. So in that moment, I failed to exercise empathy and to understand in that particular context what would and would not be appropriate. So you're thinking of others before yourself, and you can probably tell that I'm coming from a particular moral framework here. But I do think that if you think of others as more important than yourself, you're going to be at a better place. And this empathy concept requires you to think of others before yourself. And that doesn't mean put yourself down. It just means really focus on other people. And in this particular moral framework, what the suggestion is if you care more about other people and they care more about you, we create basically a group of people who are all supporting each other, right? And that's an amazing and beautiful community. And I am just being self-centered because I would rather hire someone who has more empathy. I'd rather work for someone who has more empathy. I'd rather be married to someone who has more empathy. I'd rather engage on Twitter with somebody who has more empathy. It's just a better situation for all of us all around. So there's going to be a few practical implications that I can promise for you developing more empathy. First, your open source contributions will be accepted more. Great. Paul Jones says the first rule of getting your patch accepted is to minimize the cognitive load in the person processing it. You give me a pull request that's 500 lines of code and basically 2 lines of description, it's probably going to take me a while to get to it. However, if you give me a pull request that is a paragraph, a couple bullet points about the key things I should check out, an animated GIF down at the bottom, and then a link for the instructions that I need to take to get your weird dependency set up, configured when I test it locally. And I'm not joking. You should have animated GIFs. Use LiceCap. It's amazing. Get animated GIFs on all of your pull requests, and they will be far more likely to be accepted. It's true. So if you understand the situation of the person who's going to be reviewing your code request in open source or whatever else, it is more likely to get accepted. Next thing, your code will be better, and future developers will love you more. It's true, because programs must be written for people to read and only incidentally for machines to execute. Your code, while we think about it, especially if you've been doing PHP for a while, we were like hyper-optimized and making sure the number of SQL queries you were doing would be right and whatever. And so if you focus less on making sure that it's perfect for the machine and more on making sure that it's going to be right for the next developer or the other developer, they will love you more. It's going to be much more maintainable, and you can optimize your performance things behind the scenes, but write beautiful, simple APIs. You will be a better employee. Stuart Butterfield of Slack says, one way that empathy manifests itself is courtesy. Respecting people's time is important. Don't let your colleagues down. If you say you're going to do something, do it. A lot of the standard traits that you look for in any kind of organization come down to courteousness. It's not just about having a veneer of politeness, but actually trying to anticipate someone else's needs and meeting them in advance. You are going to sound smarter. Your teams will be better. Indy Young wrote in her book, Practical Empathy, as an empathic person, when you open your mouth, other people's voices come out. You're not just going to be bringing your own wisdom and your own perspective to every team and every meeting that you're going to be part of. You are carrying a little bit of all the people you've shown empathy towards over the years with you. And you're able to say, yes, I feel this way, but my friend, who I've been in deeply empathic conversations, relationships with, will approach this from this way. And you'll be able to bring not just your own perspective, but the perspective of others along with you to every single experience you have ongoing. Your clients will love you. I'm going to quote myself. This is like the worst thing ever, but it was my favorite thing to say it, so sorry, judge me. We want our clients to hear us saying, we hear, understand, and often anticipate your needs. Whatever goes on, your priorities are our priorities. And this was from that Dev Discussions podcast I told you about. This is how we want our clients to hear from us. This is what we want them to hear from us at Titan. We want them to hear, we get you, we understand your priorities, and we are in line with them. So rather than feeling like they have to defend themselves from someone who wants a whole bunch of their money, they've got partners who are working alongside with them. And the clients really like that. That's a good thing. You'll make more friends on Twitter. Remember the aforementioned Twitter wars. If you can show empathy towards the people that you're in a battle with, you become friends. Your framework will become wildly successful. This guy, if you've not figured this out yet, he is a ridiculous empath. That is the primary reason Laravel is as successful as it is. Because when he writes the API for a particular line of code, the first thing he does, and he says this in interviews, is sit down and say, if I were a user who didn't know how to do this thing, what code would I want to be engaging with? When he first wrote it, he said, the hardest thing is documentation. People have trouble with documentation. It's being empathic to the new developer, understanding what it's like to come to a new framework. When he went back and redid all documentation in 5.1, it was asking the question of, hey, I know this framework better than anybody else, but somehow he's able to put himself in the perspective of those people who have never used it before and write documentation for them, right? That is empathy. So if you're an empath, you can take over Taylor's spot and you can make the new one of these, because that's all he's got going for him. That's what I'm saying. No, I'm not saying that at all. You're going to make people feel like they matter. If you've ever seen the movie The Help, there's this amazing moment where a not well-appreciated, not well-loved little girl is told right here, where she says, you is kind, you is smart, you is important. If you've never seen the movie, this might mean less to you. But if you have seen it, you understand that in that moment, she was seeing through the fact that nobody saw anything of good in her. She's a little chubby, she didn't meet the values and priorities of her parents. But in that particular moment, she was told that she mattered. And finally, you're going to help people know that they're not alone. Remember this moment. That's what that person needed. They just needed to be understood, and they needed to be in community with somebody. And that is what community looks like. And talking about community just for a second, and I'll be done. Pluralism basically means we have a whole bunch of different people from different groups with different priorities and different religions and different whatever else that are existing together concurrently. So if you think about the mixing bowl versus what's it called? The melting pot. America's supposed to be the great melting pot. That's terrible, because it brings everybody together, and when you melt them all together, they're now all exactly the same color and talk the same language and all that kind of stuff. Mixing bowl, on the other hand, pluralism means we come together and we're all different, but we exist concurrently, and that's what we want to be working towards, and that's what true community looks like. Also, we're on the internet, which means people are very, very likely to engage with people with even less empathy than you do in our normal life. So don't read the YouTube comments. The reason they're bad and the reason you're all laughing is because that is the prime example of people not showing empathy. That's what's bad about YouTube comments is lack of empathy. So this thing's a little bit cheesy, but I actually really love it. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. It's cheesy, but it actually has been really influential to me to keep this in mind as I'm engaging with the people around me. And it's especially the people who drive me nuts, the people who are in charge. Even when they are seeming to be together and just mean, they still probably have some reasons for that. The people who are the most self-assured and mean on Twitter are probably actually super, super insecure, and you're actually just seeing the outflowing of their insecurities. So everybody is fighting a hard battle, and we need to keep that in mind. So empathy, the ability to put yourself in the position of another person, to take on their perspective, is going to give you superpowers because it's going to make everybody like you more. You're going to be a better employee. You're going to be nicer to people. They're going to be happier around you. And as a whole, empathy will take you to a place of success as a person, yes. But regardless of that, if you end up in the exact same place you would have before, everyone around you will be better. And there's something to be said about being the type of person where you're in an environment, you're in a party, you're in a group, you're in a team, and the whole thing is better because you're there, and people start seeing that about you. That is the type of influence we want to have. There's a few talks and articles that are great. I'm not going to make you look at them right now. The slide deck will be available online. I'll put it online after this. So just check this out afterwards, and that's it. Thank you very much.